afternoon, everybody. How are you all? Yay! It's lovely to be here. So I'm Dr Suze Kundu. I'm going to be your host for today on Trust Me, I'm an AI, but I am joined by two amazing experts, and we are going to have the loveliest chat about all things hopeful, challenging, and everything in between. So, Kevin and Liz, I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves first of all. Shall I start with you, Kevin?
Okay. So I'm Kevin Fong. I'm mostly a doctor of medicine, and I'm not really an expert in AI, but I present a program for Radio 4 called Artificial Human that sort of asks all the questions that we all want to ask about AI and what it's going to do to our futures. So I'm kind of a faker here. I'm not an AI expert, but I've got lots of questions for Liz.
He's downplaying it massively. I think what's exciting is I work on AI-enabled tools. You work on that kind of intersection of innovation and application and can tell us where it goes right and where it goes a little less right. And Liz, you are a professor of AI. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I'm a professor of AI at King's College London. I've been working in AI a long time, more than 20 years. My background in AI is perhaps a bit different to the type of AI that people typically think about these days. So my background in AI is in symbolic AI. Perhaps we can talk a bit more about that later if we have time, but this is really about AI that is reasoning explicitly with explicit representations about what it believes about the world, what it believes to be true about the world, as opposed to the kind of machine learning, data-driven style of AI that people more think about these days, where AI is trained on massive amounts of data and learns patterns and so on from that data. So that's my background in AI. I run a Centre for Doctoral Training in Safe and Trusted AI. So we train PhD students. So we've had more than 80 PhD students now come through the centre, particularly in the kind of wide-ranging, kind of different challenges and things we need to address in order to have responsible, safe, trustworthy AI.
And those are very important words that we very much need to consider when we do anything scientific, but particularly, I think, when we're working on something so novel, so impactful as well, and so much in the news. I am going to ask you, Liz, how we define AI, because that is a very interesting thing. But before we get to that, can I ask, given that this is considered quite a novel area, how did you both get into this?
So I'm trying to think how to shorten this, perhaps. I got into AI, so I started off doing a maths degree at UCL, and I always loved maths. It was my favourite thing. And when I got to UCL, I did the first year of maths, and I found it was a lot of watching the back of typically an old man's head, writing on a blackboard, and I had to scribble to copy down what they were writing, and I never got to actually do the fun bits of the maths, and then I'd have to kind of scramble to try and remember what it was, and it just wasn't fun. So I changed to a different degree, and what really caught my eye was cognitive science. And at the time, you could do something with cognitive science, and so you could do psychology, linguistics, or computer science with cognitive science. And because of my maths background, I thought computer science with cognitive science would be a good fit. And it just kind of blossomed from there. So that was how I originally got into AI.
That's so interesting. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got such a good story as this. So I started out at UCL, great university, studying astrophysics. So I did quite a lot of the maths, and then went on to study medicine afterwards. And then I watched 2001 Space Odyssey, and it scared the hell out of me. And I watched Terminator, and it scared the hell out of me. And then I watched any number of other films that scared the hell out of me. But mostly, for me, I'm now Chief Medical Officer of an organisation called UCL Partners. And what we're trying to do is to work out how technology is going to help us in the future of medicine. And AI is all over that. And so part of what has recently got me really interested in AI is that there's so much out there that says AI is going to be everything for us. We're all going to live forever, and we're not going to need doctors and nurses and community health care workers anymore. I just don't think any of that's true. And so I've sort of had to learn more about it. And so, you know, that's kind of how I've got into it most recently.
It's really interesting. It's also fascinating. All of us have ended up in this AI or AI adjacent world, but all of us seem to have come from UCL as well, which is, we're going to talk about diversity later. I don't know if this is it, but it is interesting that we've got those values of kind of openness and collaboration running through what we do. We've all kind of come through academia and have found our ways into the various things that we do. So it's really interesting and very multidisciplinary, I would say, as well. So Liz, I am going to come to you then. This is Trust Me, I'm an AI. And we all know that everybody seems to slap an AI label on absolutely everything at the moment. Every startup is startupname.ai. What is artificial intelligence? How do you define it? Is there one definition, or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
It's definitely more complicated. And so going back historically to when kind of AI was first being coined, it was defined as, if I kind of paraphrasing this correctly, so a computer system that can do something that normally we would think of needing human intelligence to do. So reasoning, decision-making, perception, learning, these kind of things. But it's maybe not a super helpful definition. And you can do these things, well, some of these things, perhaps you can sometimes do in not that an intelligent way, actually. So I think it is really hard to define. And I think so certainly now when we talk about AI, I think the majority of people are thinking of generative AI, things like ChatGPT. And that's a natural, it's natural that people are thinking about this because there's been a massive explosion in what it can do in this new technology. And it's also widely available to us all. So it's very accessible. You don't need a very technical background to be able to prompt it to do things for you. So it's natural that we think about it. But I suppose the point I want to make is that isn't all of AI, right? There's lots of different types of AI. There's different approaches to AI. So I mentioned there's kind of symbolic approaches to AI. There's learning-based, kind of data-driven learning-based approaches to AI. But also we've got AI that does all kinds of different things as well. So kind of more, if you think about it more from the kind of application side, these large language models like ChatGPT do a very specific thing, but we can use AI for route planning, AI for classification of things, for prediction of things. So, if you're using Google Maps, if you've got a spam filter on your email system, that's using a form of AI to predict whether these things are spam. So I suppose I don't have an answer to your question, but what I'd like people to take away is that there's a much more of a breadth of things around AI than just these kind of generative AI models.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we kind of clarify that, because then when you do have these discussions, you need to make sure that everybody is speaking within the same definition in order for that conversation to progress meaningfully and not speak at cross purposes as well. Absolutely. Kevin, you have been very heavily involved in applications of novel AI-enabled or AI-supported tools, particularly within medicine. And this is just one example of the real-world impact that we're feeling of AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Anything that particularly surprised you, gave you hope, something that you feel is maybe really revolutionizing the way that medicine and emergency medicine in particular is being carried out?
So yeah, look, I'm really excited about AI, and make no mistake, it is, at least as far as I'm concerned, the general purpose technology of this century. It is to this century what AI, what electricity was to sort of the 18th century, and it will transform everything about our lives over the next 100 years. But how it will do that, and how fast it will do that, how completely it will do that, remains to me quite unknown. And at the moment, I think there's massive overpromise. However, in medicine, there are these sort of areas of medicine which have been digital for a long time, which have very rich digital data sets, in which, of course, AI, in the guise of machine learning rather than large language models, is already transforming it. And in particular, radiology and our imaging specialities are already being transformed. So when I first started as a house officer, 28 years ago, the only discernible bit that had a very rich digital data set was the radiology department, because they were capturing all of their files as well labeled digital files, so very rich, very high quality data. And so when AI and machine learning in particular came along, you could take it and apply it to this, wonderful sort of back catalogue of really well-labeled data, and it could help, and it could sometimes perform as well as the human operator, sometimes better than human operator at things like spotting cancerous nodules in scans, etc. So in that area, it has been really impressive and useful, because even the best radiologists get tired eventually, miss things eventually, whereas it never gets tired, and it has an amazing work capacity. On the other end of the spectrum, you get people thinking, oh, it's going to be out there and it's going to be, we're not going to need GPs anymore. General practice is the hardest job in all of medicine. It's so complicated. It has got very, very little rich data, into digital data to codify how you do that job. And I cannot see it now or any time in any near or medium, possibly any far-term future, where an AI of any kind replaces the function of a general practitioner. But that I don't think is well understood.
I think that's really interesting, actually. I think you're right. The GP friends that I have, the training is one tiny part of it. A huge amount of it is empathy, engagement, communication, community. And you can't necessarily train a program to do that. And I also think you make a really good point. We talk about AI and we think of these big applications, these really sexy applications for how we're going to use it in something like medicine. You talked about the image processing. I was speaking to somebody at a conference and they're using this natural image processing in the field where they can take ultrasounds and really quickly diagnose and appropriately triage somebody that's been injured, but really using kind of AI for things like data sorting, data cleaning, data disambiguation, particularly for kind of things like NHS records and data. It's much less sexy, but far more impactful.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely convinced that AI is going to help us in the health service with back office functions long before you build C3PO holding a scalpel and tell it to do your brain surgery for you. And this is the thing, the NHS is still in some places using fax machines. So the idea that we're going to read AI into it and transform it overnight is overvalued, I think.
Definitely. We also talk about, real world impact very broadly. But Liz, when we talk about real world impact, is it impact for everybody?
So not currently. And this is a big thing with AI, right? It is transforming a lot of things. As I say, lots of people have got access to things like ChatGPT, but often the data that these things are trained on is not representative of society, and that comes with huge problems. And people have probably seen lots of examples in the media. So Amazon were using a recruitment AI, that they trained on lots of their data to help them make their recruitment decisions. And because historically they'd been hiring a lot of men, when they trained the AI on this data, it learned that it shouldn't recommend women to be hired. And so they had to stop using it. And we've seen similar things with facial recognition software, where the data sets these have been trained on historically have been dominated by white men. And so this facial recognition software is very, very good at recognizing white men and not good at recognizing people of color, and particularly women of color. And this can have really, really significant consequences. If this software is being used to work out, I don't know who a big crowd might be a criminal threat or something. This can have really, really significant consequences. So it's a big worry, and it's perhaps, there's so much power in these big tech industries that they have who are developing this, and it's not clear that they necessarily have any motivation to perhaps do better with these things. So I think it's a massive concern.
Yeah, because all the tech billionaires are a really good cross-section of society, aren't they? And this is a real problem, isn't it? Because, AI is not separate from us, and my friend David Mendel, who's professor of control theory out at MIT, says, software is the most human of all things. It's made by humans, it's refined by humans, and so it entrains their biases and the biases of society in general. And there's a really salient story from history about that. Where in the 1980s, when I would have been thinking about applying for medical school, St. George's Hospital used a personal computer to try and do its shortlisting for medical student candidates. And they wrote this program, and when someone unpicked the code in the program, they found out that this shortlisting program was giving women a score of -3, and people with a non-Anglo-Saxon surname a score of -15 off the bat. So they came under the microscope for racist and sexist recruiting policy. But what had happened was the person who had coded that model had been asked to reproduce the existing behaviors of the shortlisting panels, who, guess what, tended not to pick those people. And so he was just reproducing the statistics. And all of the other medical schools who'd criticized them, it turned out they were doing the same thing. They just weren't doing it with computers. And so the risk is that as we go forwards, if you build your AI and if you're not conscious of the biases that are already there, you'll just entrain them, and you will get this. And so it is not objective. This stuff isn't objective. It's only as good as the data it learns from, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one other concerning thing around that as well is the fact that we're using AI to generate training data to teach AI. And if you're not doubling down on all the biases riddled within that, that's really dangerous. I mean, this isn't necessarily a new issue in research. We have a session on Sunday called, I think it's Uncivilized Hysteria, and it talks about how the entire endeavor of science and research is built on foundations riddled with bias. But when it comes to something like AI, and generative AI in particular, it's the fact that it's recreating and propagating all of those challenges as well. So how can we trust these systems? What do we need to do to ensure that if we are building programs for things like recruitment or selection, how do we try and make them less biased? How do we, as the public impacted by that, trust these systems?
So I think the key thing is we have to be critical of them, right? We should not just trust them blindly. I mean, definitely not. So we need to critically engage with them. We need to think about the responses that we're getting. We need to look at the data and think carefully about that. And really importantly, we need to build the diversity into the teams of people that are looking at these things. And that's diversity in all kinds of forms, right? So diversity of experience, of perspectives, of values, of the ways we think, but also diversity of disciplines. So I think that's a really, really crucial point as well. It's not... these things are being used by people in society, and so we need to look at them. It's not just a technical issue, it's a kind of socio-technical thing. So we need... it can't just be AI experts working at these things. We need to be working together with lawyers, with policymakers, with philosophers, with anthropologists, social scientists. It needs this kind of holistic approach, really, to address the kind of multi-ranging challenges that are around it.
I mean, just out of curiosity, in this tent and in the periphery of the tent, hands up if you have used AI or an aspect of AI in the last week.
Wow.
So I think it might have been easier to ask who hasn't used an aspect of AI. Fabulous. And again, it does depend on definition. But imagine if, as researchers, we're very lucky in some ways that these developments, this novel technology has been placed in the hands of the public. And all of you could be data points for feedback. We could learn so much from how you're all using it. Do you think we have enough public engagement in a situation like this, where everybody is already using it, everybody's going to be so impacted by it, or do we need to do more to help people understand the limitations and things?
So I mean, one of the key phrases there was the socio-technical theory is like one of these unwieldy things, but basically it talks about how, the technology doesn't stand on its own. It's created by us, and we use it, and so it's a hybrid system, and the same is true with AI. AI does not stand separately from us. It's really, really important here. It's never been more important. Socio-technical theory is about 100 years old, but it's never been more important here. And there's a chap at MIT called Darren Acemoglu who is an economist, actually, but he's got a Nobel Prize, so he knows one or two things. And he talks about how it is possible for people to lose when you introduce technology if you don't do the right things. And he gives examples in the past where it's not just the old story of there are Luddites, and when everyone gets together and adopts these technologies, it's all fine in the end. He says in the early phase, there are people who identifiably lose. And he said in this iteration of technological revolution, he said, to avoid that, there is a unique opportunity for us to build these technologies around people. And that's what I keep saying. When I go back and when we talk to senior tiers of NHS administration and in part government, I'm always at pains to say, look, there's an opportunity here for us to co-create this technology, for us to build technology in support of the people who are using it rather than in spite of them or instead of them. And that is really important, because that's, in the end, how we get to a future in which we can all trust what we're consuming and how you don't get people who lose so clearly as they have in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Liz, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I completely agree, and I think indeed we need more public engagement and more kind of diversity of voices. But I suppose the other thing I was thinking is we also need more kind of public education. There's so much hype around some of this stuff, and as we know, almost everyone is using AI now on a kind of day-to-day basis. And I think, particularly with these large language models, things like ChatGPT, there's perhaps a bit of a kind of, well, I suppose the thing is that these things present their answers so confidently and so authoritatively, and you engage with them in such a natural way that it's kind of natural to think of these things as thinking and reasoning and feeling in the same way that we are. But that's not what they're doing. And fundamentally, they are not doing that. They are predicting words to kind of spit back at you based on the huge amount of kind of training data that they've seen. And we know that sometimes that can be nonsense. They're prone to what's called hallucinations, so they can present something very confidently and very convincingly, very plausibly as fact that just isn't true. And so it's very easy to fall into this trap of really, really over-trusting them, when really we need to engage with that critically, and we should not trust the output unless we can verify it ourselves. And that can be quite difficult. And we see examples of this a lot. I mean, I see it as an academic with students' work and applications for students to come and do a PhD, and sometimes you get them and they will look very convincing and they have references in them. And I think, that looks like a really interesting reference. I know some of these authors, but I haven't come across this before. Let me have a look. And it's just completely made up, but it looks so convincing. And so I think there's a real danger of this, because it does engage so kind of naturally of over-trusting these things.
Yeah, definitely. The hallucinations, particularly around referencing, are terrifying. Yeah. But these programs have learned to create something. They know what it looks like and they know what it feels like. And I think we are at risk of over-trusting them sometimes. But sort of speaking and thinking about that aspect of trust in an application-driven setting, then, like medicine, for example, where does AI sit in the kind of racy? Because we're never going to be in that position where we explicitly trust it to make a final decision, are we? Ultimately, it will come down still to subject matter experts, won't it, Kevin?
Well, we were talking about this, weren't we, next door just before this. I think it might be a really good decision support tool. Because in the moment when you're there making a decision on the spot, you're trying to remember every possibility in front of you as the world unfolds in front of you in real time. And so while you're not just going to necessarily turn a machine onto your, put a camera on your patient and ask the machine just to do your job for you, you might do that thing that you already do. So I work with one of the air ambulances, and when we're on the ground and you're trying to work out why your patient is sick. Your patient is sick, but you don't know why, and you think, well, I've done the first 4 things I can think of. The next thing I do is I turn around to the paramedic who's with me and I say, am I missing something? I've done this, 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 and this. Am I missing something? And they say, no, no, no. And then you go around the whole team, and eventually someone says, have you thought about giving some magnesium or something? And as they usually do. And the point is that actually an AI as a decision support tool might be really useful there because it's much better at not forgetting the exhaustive list of possibilities. And so this sort of co-pilot function I can see being useful in the quite near future if we configure these systems properly.
And that's how or in a different context, I see colleagues particularly, and friends as well, using things like ChatGPT as a very useful supportive tool to help kind of marshal their own thoughts and kind of try and make sense of their own kind of data and ideas. And I think using it, I agree, using it in a supportive capacity like that and working out when that can be beneficial, I think that those are the things we need to be focusing on, not blindly trusting it.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying is it can improve efficiency, it can support workflows and things. It really is a tool rather than necessarily always a solution, is what you're kind of talking about. So how do you think this is already impacting people? The horse bolted long ago. How can we still best prepare people to work with AI and to navigate an AI-supported world?
So I was really encouraged to see how many people have used it in the last week. I think that that's the only way for us to get better with it, is to use it and to play with it, preferably into low consequence. Don't ask it whether you should marry someone. But I think in low consequence settings, it's good to play with it, and I have. And my co-presenter on Artificial Human would get annoyed with me to hear me only talk about the negatives of it. This is a transformative technology. It will transform the world around us in ways that we can't possibly imagine right now. But we don't know how. Very few people. I'd argue nobody really knows how this plays out. If for those of us who are in the audience who are around at the start of this century, if someone had told you what 2025 was going to look like in terms of mobile computing and the internet and even Netflix, really wasn't that obvious that the future was going to look like that. AI is much more potent, much more complex. So 2050, I think, is going to be quite surprising, but in ways that are going to be surprising. So I think playing with it is a really important thing, and I continue to play with it and see what its limits are. I think it always helps to know ahead of time what the answer is so you can verify whether or not it's giving you a load of rubbish. But, the other day my boiler wasn't working, and I kind of had a sense that it was the pump. And the pump had a few settings, and there were 4 lights on the pump, and I knew that there were different ways to set it. I had no idea how to set it, and I took a photo of it. I said, this is the pump in my boiler room. This is the make. I live in a house with 4 bedrooms. What setting should this pump be? And it gave me a pretty good answer that turned out to be right off of a photograph. That's pretty impressive. And so I think that's the way to do it, to play with it and to see and experiment with it.
So I have a little question around that. We know that the average ChatGPT query is 10 times more impactful on the environment than a Google search, for example. So in that particular kind of a situation, how do you feel using generative AI was a benefit to you over doing a Google search?
Yeah, I'm very mindful of that, and this is very clear, right? So a Google search where you say, I have this pump, can you send me the instruction manual, is a negligible amount of electricity and thereby a negligible carbon footprint. If you say, draw me a picture of Tony Blair riding a unicorn or whatever, that on its own is that's a horrible image, but that on its own is enough energy to charge half a mobile phone. It's a huge amount of energy, and indeed one of the potential fundamental near-term limits on AI is its energy usage, right? So, and this is one of the startling things to me. We were making one of our programs about the carbon footprint of AI. And in the United States, they've had to refire the nuclear reactors or at least they were considering refiring the nuclear reactors in 3 Mile Island to meet the energy demands of the data centers that are fueling the AI revolution. Right now, the data centers that we rely upon when we do our Google searches and our generative AI searches have a carbon footprint equivalent to that of the commercial airline industry. By next year, they will exceed the commercial airline industry. So it is something we need to think about as a limiting factor.
And I think, so it's making me think there are so many of these potential implications of AI, and this is one of the really complicated things. And I think this is something we, as people using AI, can think more about. And certainly the environment is one of those. But it's also things like, what impact is it going to have on us as social beings? If everyone's interacting more and more with this kind of artificial technology, are we going to lose some of the kind of social connections, the way we connect with people in real life? What impact will it have on our cognitive abilities if we're kind of farming out asking AI to create arguments for us and construct, compelling speeches for us? Are we going to lose the ability to do that? I think there's so many questions, and it is important to think about, how these things are going to impact on us. And more and more I kind of think about the comparison with social media, and that has had a huge impact, I think, on the way we are and the way we engage with people. And it terrifies me in lots of ways, in the way that particularly young people that have grown up with it, and the impact it has on people's self-esteem and all these kind of things. And, if we'd have known all of that ahead of time, would we have done something differently? I don't know. But I think these are questions we should try and ask now before it's too late.
And that's the thing about the whole digital era, which is so recent but moves so quickly, because the history of technology is you invent the technology, it's very useful. So technology is always neutral, right? It has two edges to it, and it helps us and it hurts us, and you have to mitigate the things that hurt you and take great advantage of the things that help you. But the history of technology generally is we invent something, we find it very useful, and then we find a downside, and then we retrospectively regulate and mitigate that. And so the internal combustion engine, you don't need me to tell you, and decades later we're thinking about climate change and aviation, etc., etc., etc. The splitting of the atom, 1938, and you see how quickly you get to a point where you have to mitigate the potential consequences, having worked out that can generate a huge amount of power. The problem is in the digital era, I think, and I continue to ask myself this question, is it moves so fast that the speed of the laws that regulate these things is almost always behind the mitigations that are required. And so you kind of almost need a new, much more forward-thinking regulatory framework. But that has a downside too, because that limits the speed with which you can move, which nobody wants. But from the medical side, we've seen this before, right? All of the revolutions in biotechnology that happened at the start of the 20th century, antibiotics and blood transfusions and all the rest of it, we very rapidly see applications of those technologies that cause harm at scale that need massive regulation. It's why it takes so long to get a new drug approved, right? And so we know that, and we did that. And so we were willing to say, we're going to put the brakes on this thing because we know that the consequence of not doing so is harm at scale in a way that can be very cruel and unusual. And as one of our contributors said to us while we were making the series, you can't drive a car without brakes. And I think you probably can't drive the vehicle that is AI without having some regulatory framework.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think coming back to the aspects of ethics and of trust, critical thought is really key, both in terms of how we're using it and in how we utilize the results that it is giving us as well. So being sensible about both of those things, keeping those in balance. I think the regulatory part as well is a really interesting thing. I mean, I've seen the use of AI creeping into research publication and knowledge sharing and information. And constantly you have, from the researcher level, you have universities saying we won't accept anything that has used any AI. And then you're going, well, I've used Grammarly. That's a form of this definition of AI, so where do you draw the line? And so each time this revolution is coming about and increasing in pace, it does feel like the rule setters are having to eventually go, oh, okay, well, everyone's doing that now, and we understand that a bit better, so we'll allow that, but we won't have it as a peer review process, or and so it's continually changing and adapting. How can we, and just before I ask you this question, there is an opportunity for you all to ask questions as well. So if you are going to have a question, could you pop your hand up, because we are going to come to you in a second, and we'll see if we can get a microphone out to you all there. So there's a few at the front there. I will come to you in a moment. So how do you think we can best understand and therefore create governance and regulation around these things? And do we need to maybe involve more people in that? Liz?
Well, I don't know the answer to the question, but absolutely we need to involve more people. And I think this comes back to the, it's not just a technical problem. And actually it's not just, we can't just have policymakers thinking about it on their own. We need to all be working together on these problems. We need to understand how it impacts on people. And indeed, I think we probably do need new models of it. We also need to be careful of who is influencing these regulations, because at the moment there is a lot of power. A lot of the tech companies sit on these advisory boards, and so, we need people to be involved in this more, so that, we want these things to serve, well, I do, and perhaps not all the big tech companies do care about this, but we want these things to serve everyone, to serve our diverse kind of society, so people need to have a voice in that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to this thing has to come from all of us, so not just the tech bros in California. And the problem we have with this technology is it is in the interests of some of the most powerful private citizens that have ever existed to promote it. And it is a technology, and we know this from the history of technology studies, is that all technologies, as I've said, are only neutral, and how you deploy them depends on how they manifest. And so, Liz's earlier point about the need to have everyone with skin in the game as we're creating it and as we regulate it going forward, so that we listen to everybody as we're creating it, is really important. It's really, really, really easy to get caught up with the hype here. And I do worry that we might reach points where we fail to mitigate something that proves to be quite potent, and at the same time fail to take best advantage of something that genuinely has the potential to save many, many, many lives. So AI might be amazing in drug discovery. It might well be helpful in the fight to find a cure for cancer. But we've got to navigate that really carefully. This is a complex and uncertain technology, and in history, all complex and uncertain technologies, if mishandled, cause harm at scale.
Yeah, definitely. It does still feel like, when we think about the power balance, you have sort of capitalism that's really dominating, but really we want to tip it more to the community side of things, because people are being impacted and people are inherently so innovative as well. I was chatting with you, Liz, about a company called Sunbird AI, and their founder, Ernest Mobaze, has done amazing work in using AI to connect different professions and communities in Uganda so they can make the most of their resources, their knowledge, they can share and gather really useful insights into how to manage new factors that are coming in. And we want to see more of that, and we want to see less of the people that have the power creating that governance as well. And so there's an opportunity to break in there, absolutely. Let's come to some audience questions now. There's a lady all the way back there, Trent. Oh, I was going to make you walk, but it's fine. Lady in the white, you're going to be next. I'm going to come to you, the person with the microphone first.
Hi. A question for Liz, really. I'm in the education business, and AI has destroyed the essay and the report as a form of marking students. But what I've noticed is rubbish generative AI, drawing structured diagrams, Venn diagrams, organograms, can't do it. That's got to be temporary. I wonder how temporary is that situation?
So I don't know the answer to your question, but I think you're probably right. I mean, it's getting better all the time at all of these things. And I completely agree with your sentiment, as somebody that has to read reports and applications from students. It's so obvious when you get something. Well, maybe it's not always obvious, because maybe sometimes I'm not noticing these things, but a lot of the time it's really obvious, because you get these things that are submitted, and they, on the surface level, they look right? They kind of look like an essay, they look like an application that kind of makes sense, they've got the right kind of structure, but there's no depth to it. It's a kind of collection of things that doesn't really have any depth. So I'm not exactly answering your question, but I think, I guess this goes back to the point that, I think we have to accept that students are going to be using these things, and they are using them. And as you were saying earlier, universities are kind of rushing to catch up with the way people are using them and putting kind of processes in place around how we use them and how we assess, given that students are using them. So I think we need to move to a different kind of model where we understand that students will use these tools, and indeed students should use these tools for good use, but we need to get these kind of checks in place so that they aren't just using them blindly, but they're kind of using them, they are engaging with what they're getting back, they are checking whether, you know, this diagram makes any sense or not, and that they're able to kind of explain the things that are being generated, they're being able to verify it, they're being able to use it in a way that is with their own voice, because that's the kind of thing that you lose. You lose the kind of personal voice with it. It just comes out and it's kind of bland. So, yeah, I guess to come back to your question, I think that it is getting better at all of these things. But I think unless somebody is engaging with it and kind of, you know, modifying it and putting it into their own words, which I think is an okay use of it, then I think you will still be able to tell that it has been generated by an AI and not a person.
It's the critical thought again, isn't it? It's looking at what it's generated and going, does this Venn diagram make sense or not? So really engaging with those outputs. I mean, we chatted earlier in terms of supporting neurodiverse people to gather thoughts and a narrative from a big brain dump, or whether it's supporting somebody for whom English is not their first language. There are ways that AI can really help in education, but it is really just still better understanding its limitations as well, for sure. And sometimes, I suppose, adapting the way that we assess within education too. So thank you so much. It was a great question. Thank you for the answer. Person in the white shirt, thank you.
Oh, hello. Thank you. This has been really interesting. I also work in healthcare, and there is sort of an accepted tragic trope that it takes about 10 years from the best evidence to be found till it's put into practice. And I wonder if there is a development in place for this to become not a statistician in your pocket, but a riskatarian in your pocket.
A riskatarian is a great word. Kevin.
So yes, and again, I think that its value as a co-pilot in augmenting and a decision support tool is substantial. But again, you're going to have to, like all medical tools that are used in live environments, create that quite carefully before you set it loose. So I think it will help us with risk stratification. It is better at crunching the numbers than we are, and especially in the real-time environment. But building those tools is going to be non-trivial. It's not going to be like you stick ChatGPT Medic in your pocket and go. That will take the same amount of time to create, if you're going to create it responsibly, as potentially as deploying a new drug or a comparable timescale, if you want it to be safe.
Thank you so much. We've probably got time for 2, maybe 3 questions. So I'm going to sort the order now so Trent can get his step count up. I'm going to go to the person in the blue shirt here. Then there is somebody in a lovely hat there. So thank you very much for holding the hat up. And then finally, how can I make Trent walk the most? I think the person with their hand up with the glasses, yep, you. At the back. So that is going to be you, and then finally you. Make it a good one at the end. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm a photographer and have been for 35 years. A client recently sent me an email highlighting that we transfer a vehicle that I use to send my pictures to my clients, who then store them in a kind of cloud system, might be using AI imagery for sort of AI use. In my head, I'm thinking, actually, that's quite a good idea, because, you know, the whole point of bad AI is that it hasn't got, imagery, it hasn't got words, it hasn't got people's interpretation of things. Is this good or is this scary? Should I be worried, or should I be quite happy about this?
Do you mean it's using your data that you're uploading it, potentially?
Potentially, unless I get all, pulling out of it all, or scared. And, I mean, the client's email was basically, this is scary. But I'm thinking, actually, is it, though?
So I think this is really interesting. So and there's a lot of concern in the creative industry about AI replacing people, and rightly so, and also AI using things like people's images, people's stories, people's films to learn from. And I don't know which way this is going to go, but I can see, and I see on my Instagram feeds, which, used to have a lot of animals on it, and now I see things and I think that is not a real animal. You get a lot of kind of nonsense. And so maybe one way we might go is we just end up with a lot of kind of samey, not very interesting stuff. But maybe I can see, there is a world in which we learn to use it in really creative ways, and it actually adds to our creativity. And, creative people learn from, are inspired from what's gone on all the time. So I hope that we find a way that actually, it doesn't replace people, because I think if we replace people, we will lose that kind of humanity from it. But as a way of kind of augmenting and kind of driving and nudging our creativity in different directions, I hope that is the future we're moving to.
So I'm not sure. We did a long program about copyright and AI, especially because one of the larger tech companies decided to turn its AI onto a pirate book site, so a site that had illegally pirated books to train its large language models. So it could have paid for it. It just decided it would take too long, and it was in too much of a hurry, so it wasn't going to pay for it. And that I think might be problematic. I suspect when historians look back upon this era of the way we interact with technology and the value we generated as a population, I suspect there'll be a line in those future historians' books that'll say, never was so much work done by so many for free for the enrichment of so few. So I do worry about that, so I hope you're a very good photographer.
But you are right. Credit and provenance and making sure people are compensated for the work they've put into this so that others don't benefit for free is so important. Hat person.
Hello. Recently, I was involved in writing a paper involving AI and misinformation in politics, mostly on fake AI voice models and imagery and deepfakes. Do you fear that it might be a problem in the future that misinformation might be generated regarding politics or economics or other such controversial topics?
In the future?
Yeah.
I mean, it's already a problem, but will it get worse?
I fear so. As you say, it's already a problem. There are lots of examples of this. In a way, it's not a new phenomenon. It was already a thing that existed, people spreading misinformation, but with these AI technologies, it just amplifies it, and it makes it much harder, actually, for people to kind of identify what is, true. These kind of videos are getting better and better all the time. And I think it's also kind of playing into our own biases. And there's a kind of another layer to that, because a lot of the news and the things that we get fed are fed by kind of recommender systems, AI systems that kind of predict what you're likely to engage with based on the kind of things you've engaged with before. So it's just further kind of amplifying these kind of biases that we already have and kind of polarizing us more and more. So I'm massively concerned about that, I have to say.
And I think there's the sort of inadvertent misinformation, but the very deliberate disinformation that I think is even more concerning, where people create this with intent. So that's a great question. Thank you so much. Right, our final question before we wrap up, at the back there.
Jesus. Hello. So before we had AI, there was NFTs. Before that, it was blockchain. Before that, it was metaverse. And before that, it was Bitcoin. And then before that, it was the .com. All of these were huge, big promises of technology that ended up as a bubble. And the bubble burst and led to a huge crash. And even in the case of the .com bubble, where it still led to some useful things, do you think AI is headed down the same path? Do you think we're headed to an AI bubble burst?
That's a difficult question. I used to think that more, or not think it as a concrete definite, but I used to think that was more of a possibility. I think it less and less now, and I guess part of that is because these other kind of technologies you talk about, they were big kind of booms, but they weren't in the hands of the people in the same way that AI is now. So, particularly with these generative AI tools, they are out there and people are using them. And I don't think there's a way of coming back from that now. In the same kind of way, once social media was out there and everyone's using it and it becomes a convenient thing, you can't really close the door on that. So I don't think it's going away. And I think what we need to work hard to do is make sure that we see the benefits that are going to really benefit everyone from it and mitigate for these harms that we've spoken about.
Yeah, so I take your point, but non-fungible tokens, blockchain, etc., are not general purpose technologies. They don't meet that definition. This is a general purpose technology. It can be applied in many different ways, in many different fields, and it will develop. That said, I don't know about you, but this particular decade feels an awful lot like the 1990s did in terms of the dot-com boom. Now the dot-com boom was based upon the internet becoming the internet, right? But it still managed to play out to be a very profitable and very useful technology at scale. So I think that we are going to have a hype cycle now. I think there's going to be a bunch of people placing bets in the stock market on technologies they do not understand well. And I think when people start to work out what's what in that, all of that will go away. So I think financially there may be a bubble here. But in terms of technology, this is the technology. My co-presenter on Artificial Human laughs at me for saying this is the most consequential technology of the 21st century, but I genuinely think it is amongst the most consequential technology of the 21st century, and like it or not, it's here, and it's on all of us to try and shape it and understand it.
I cannot think of a better way to end this conversation. We don't have time to tell people where they can find out more about all of your work, so please do look them up, but that question was definitely worth it. Thank you so much, Professor Liz Black. Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin Fong. I hope you've had a brilliant time as well. Thank you to the team.
Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Even if you haven't enjoyed it, I still think you should support us at patreon.com/Cosmic Shambles. So, and also, by the way, click and subscribe. That's what they say, don't they? I'm 55 and I'm having to say click and subscribe. I mean, just for the loss of dignity, you should click and subscribe.